Today we're talking about something that sounds simple on the surface and then gets complicated fast. Buying or selling a small or mid-sized business. SMB M&A. It's one of the biggest financial events most founders and owners will ever go through. And it's not just a price tag and a handshake. It's valuation, marketing, financing, legal documents, due diligence. And then the part everyone underestimates. What happens after the closing date?
And the tricky part is, the same step can feel totally different depending on which side you're on. If you're selling, you're thinking, how do I protect confidentiality and still get multiple serious buyers? If you're buying, you're thinking, how do I make sure the numbers are real and the business doesn't fall apart the second I take over?
So here's how we'll do this episode. We'll walk the whole life cycle in plain language. Valuation, preparing and marketing the business, how buyers actually fund these deals, the paperwork, the investigation phase, and then we'll spend real time on continuity and integration. Because a deal isn't a win just because it closed.
Let's start with the question everyone asks first, what's my business worth? Or if you're buying, what should I pay? And the frustrating answer is, it depends. But not in a vague way. It depends on cash flow, risk, growth outlook, customer concentration, and how transferable the business is without the owner.
Right. People hear valuation and assume it's one formula. In practice, you usually see a few lenses used together. One is the income approach, like discounted cash flow, where you're basically asking, what are future cash flows worth today, given the risk? Another is market comps, where you look at similar companies that sold and what multiples they got. Another is asset-based value, which comes up more when the assets themselves are a story, like equipment-heavy businesses.
And SMB deals get personal because a lot of value can be trapped in the owner. If the owner is the rainmaker, the lead operator, and the problem solver, then the buyer isn't just buying a company, they're buying a transition challenge. That affects price, but it also affects structure. Sometimes you'll see earnouts or seller notes partly because the buyer is saying, I'll pay more if the results actually continue.
That's a good segue into the seller side of the process, marketing the business. Because if you only have one buyer, you don't have leverage. But if you blast it publicly, you can spook employees, customers, and vendors. So the seller has to create demand while staying discreet.
That's where the standard playbook shows up. You package the story. Often that means a confidential information memorandum, a CIM. It's not just here are my financials. It's the narrative, what the company does, why customers stay, what the growth levers are, what the risks are, and what a buyer could do with it. And then outreach is targeted, not random. Strategic buyers, private equity groups, search funds, high net worth buyers. You want the right buyers competing, not just anyone with a checkbook.
And even before the CIM, the seller has to prep, clean up financial reporting, document key processes, list customer and supplier relationships clearly, and be ready to explain anomalies. The number one way deals get discounted is when a buyer senses chaos or incomplete information.
Now let's talk financing, because this is the part that can make a deal feel real or fall apart completely. Buyers rarely pay 100% cash. Commonly it's a stack, some buyer equity, some bank debt, sometimes private equity, and very often some form of seller financing.
Seller financing can look like a promissory note, where the seller gets paid over time, or an earnout, where part of the price is tied to future performance. Sellers don't love the uncertainty of earnouts, but buyers use them when the future is hard to predict or when the seller's involvement is critical. The key is that the financing structure isn't just a math problem. It's a risk allocation negotiation.
Exactly. And that negotiation flows right into documentation. This is where people underestimate how much paper a deal generates. You usually start with confidentiality agreements, NDAs, because the seller needs to share sensitive information without losing control of it. Then you get to a letter of intent, the LOI, which lays out major terms: price, structure, timeline, what's included, what's excluded.
And the LOI is where people can get burned if they treat it like a casual document. It might not be the final contract, but it sets expectations and momentum. It also governs key points like exclusivity. If the seller signs exclusivity too early or for too long, they can lose leverage. If the buyer gets exclusivity and then drags their feet, the business can suffer and the seller is stuck waiting.
Then comes the big one, the purchase agreement. That might be an asset purchase agreement or a stock purchase agreement, and choosing between those has huge consequences. Buyers often prefer asset deals because they can pick what liabilities they're taking and sometimes get tax advantages. Sellers often prefer stock deals because the exit can be cleaner and potentially more favorable tax-wise depending on the situation.
Which brings us to the two experts you absolutely cannot wing: lawyers and tax advisors. A good M&A attorney isn't just drafting. They're protecting you with representations, warranties, indemnities, closing conditions, and all the what-if scenarios people don't want to imagine. And tax professionals help structure the deal, so you don't accidentally turn a great headline price into a disappointing net outcome.
Now, due diligence. This is the buyer's deep dive, and sellers sometimes experience it as, why are they interrogating my business? But diligence is basically the buyer verifying the story. If you claim recurring revenue, they'll look at contracts. If you claim strong margins, they'll reconcile financials to bank statements and customer invoices. If you claim low risk, they'll ask about lawsuits, compliance, and customer concentration.
And diligence isn't only financial. It's legal diligence, operational diligence, commercial diligence. Who are the top customers? How stable are they? What happens if one leaves? What's the supplier risk? Are there key employees who hold everything together? Are there undocumented processes that only exist in one person's head?
The best sellers treat diligence like an organized data room, not a scavenger hunt. Because when data comes in late or inconsistently, buyers assume the worst. Even if the reality is fine, uncertainty gets priced in as a discount or stricter terms.
Let's pause on a part that affects everything we've mentioned: business continuity. During a sale process, the business still has to perform. Customers still need service, employees still need leadership, and revenue still needs to come in. But the owner is distracted, leadership is in meeting mode, and suddenly the core engine starts sputtering.
And if performance drops mid-process, buyers notice immediately. It can impact valuation, it can change financing terms, and it can even kill the deal. So owners who are selling need to keep the business boring in a good way: stable operations, clean cash management, and no surprises.
Cash flow deserves its own spotlight. People talk about profits, but buyers pay attention to actual cash generation and how working capital behaves. If the business requires cash to grow, or if receivables lag, or inventory piles up, that changes the risk profile. And working capital targets at closing can become a fight if both sides don't define what normal looks like.
Now let's jump to the moment everyone thinks is the finish line: closing. Money transfers, documents are signed, and it feels like, we made it. But post-close is where outcomes are decided. Integration is not an administrative task. It's where value is either created or slowly leaks away.
For the seller, post-close needs can be surprisingly intense. Many sellers stay on for a transition period. They may have earnouts to hit or a seller note to get paid back. So they care about smooth operations, accurate reporting, and a relationship with a new owner that doesn't turn toxic.
And for the buyer, this is where the strategy has to become reality. Maybe your goal was to expand into a new market. Maybe it was to combine operations and reduce costs. Maybe it was to acquire talent or a customer base. Whatever the rationale, you have to integrate systems, people, and processes without breaking what made the business work in the first place.
Which leads to the most human part of M&A: stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers. If employees hear rumors, anxiety goes up and performance goes down. If customers feel uncertainty, they may shop around. If suppliers think the relationship will change dramatically, they may tighten terms.
So communication is not optional, it's a retention tool. Employees want to know, are my job and benefits safe? Who do I report to? Are we changing priorities? Customers want to know, will service stay consistent? Will pricing change? Who do I call now? Suppliers want to know, are forecasts stable? Will you pay on time? Are we still partners?
Culture is a quiet deal term no one writes down. You can buy the company, But you can't just command trust. If you change everything on day one, you might break morale. If you change nothing, you might miss the improvements that justified the purchase. The balance is protect what works, improve what's truly limiting growth, and keep the best people engaged.
I always think of it like this. The spreadsheet tells you what should happen. The transition plan determines what actually happens. That plan needs owners for each workstream: operations, finance, tech, HR, customer communications. Not a "we'll figure it out," but clear actions and timelines.
Before we wrap, let's do a rapid-fire reality check for both sides. Sellers, if you're thinking about an exit, start getting ready earlier than you think. Clean records, documented processes, and a management team that can run without you can add more value than a fancy sales pitch.
Buyers, don't fall in love with the idea of the business so much that you skip verification. Diligence isn't distrust, it's responsibility. And pay attention to how the business performs during the process. The way a seller responds to requests, the organization of information, and the stability of operations all tell you what ownership will feel like later.
And for everyone, get the right experts. Advisors can manage the process and create competitive tension. Lawyers protect you from future regrets. Tax professionals protect your net outcome. But even with great experts, you still have to make good decisions about risk, structure, and people.
Because SMB M&A isn't just a transaction. It's a transfer of responsibility, relationships, and identity. Done well, it creates huge opportunity for the buyer and a meaningful, well-earned exit for the seller. Done poorly, it turns into a long, expensive lesson.
That's the playbook. Valuation that matches reality, marketing that creates leverage without chaos, financing that aligns incentives, documentation that protects both sides, diligence that surfaces truth, and integration that respects humans as much as numbers. If you're anywhere near a deal, keep that full life cycle in mind, not just a closing date.